G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm of course Caulfield, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Path of Champions, but we're going to be doing a tier list today. So this is a follow-up to the Champions tier list that I made several days back. That tier list was actually suggested by one of you guys here on the channel a while back, and you actually suggested that I do a Relic tier list as well. So another recent comment actually surfaced and requested that I do a Relic tier list. So I thought, you know what, let's go ahead and take a look at it today and see if I could rank certain relics for you guys, and at the same time give you a little bit of what I know about some of these relics. Okay, so like my Champions tier list, there are going to be 5 categories today. S for too damn good, A for awesome, B for
nice.
Once again, thank you Michael Rosen, C not bad, and D if I really had to. So the judging criteria for today is also really simple. There's going to be only one criteria, and that is going to be how efficient that particular relic is. Now this gives rise to another problem, which is of course the fact that I've also included some common relics here. So I will try my best not to be too biased against the common relics, but I think it's a well-known established fact that the rare relics are definitely better than the commons. It's not to say that the commons aren't too great. Some of them are fairly decent, but like I said, I will try my best not to be too biased against them, but I know for a fact, right off the bat, some of them are probably not that good. Okay, so let's quickly just scroll back up, and another thing to note before we get this video started is that tier lists are really subjective, so this is based on my opinion of that particular relic. Your mileage might vary, you may have a different opinion, you may have a certain relic ranked higher up or a certain relic ranked lower down, so feel free to leave me your thoughts down in the comment section down below. I'd really love to learn from you guys and hear what is your thoughts or your personal input on some of these relics as well as these rankings. But without further ado, let's quickly get this video started, and we're gonna kick things off with the first relic today in the rare category, which is the Arcane Comet. So round start, create a fleeting falling comet in hand. This is a really good relic because quite frankly the fleeting falling comet is one of the best items to have, one of the best spells to have, especially on a champion like Lux. That's quite simply because the falling comet is a 6-cost spell. It's also an obliterate, so basically what that means is that we get to level up the Lux immediately upon playing the fleeting falling comet, and once that happens the Lux will have access to the final spark, and then essentially you could just keep spamming final sparks and whatnot. So this is a really good relic pairing with Lux, and at the same time the falling comet with the obliterate is just generally really good because essentially it will take out the enemy without triggering the last breath if the enemy has a last breath. One problem with this is that there is of course the possibility of being denied, but that's really a small possibility. So I would say this item is a really good item, and I think it deserves to be in the too damn good category. Okay, so let's go next into the Archangel Staff. Round start, refill your spell mana. Now this item is actually a reward from Jin's second campaign, and by the way, I should point out at this point that some of these relics are basically obtained from campaigns, like the story mode campaigns. I will point out how to obtain them through, which champion story mode campaigns. If I don't mention anything, that means that particular relic is not obtainable through a campaign. That means it's only obtainable through a reliquary, which are those orbs that you get when you complete some of the weekly adventures or the weekly quest, if you will, or the daily quest if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, if I don't mention anything about a particular relic, that automatically means that that particular relic is only obtainable through reliquaries. So yeah, coming back to the Archangel Staff, this is a reward from Jin's 2-star story mode campaign, and this is arguably one of the better items in this game, quite frankly because it will essentially refill your spell mana every round start. So this basically works as a substitute for the sorcery power, which will basically do the same thing. The only difference is that it's a guaranteed refill your spell mana, because after all powers are random in the Path of Champions. There is only one caveat though. This only works once you bring on the champion in question equipping the relic. So say if the champion is not on the board yet, it's probably not gonna work. Okay, so my suggestion for the Archangel Staff is to probably pair it up with champions like Lux, Annie, or even Jin. Anyone that's really spell based. If I think Vhagar should also benefit from it as well. But like I said, any champion who is really spell based, the Archangel Staff will shine, and it basically guarantees that you get your spell mana in order to play more spells. Where would I rank this item? I would rank this at an A, quite simply because like I said, there is a power in the Path of Champions that will actually give you the same effect, and since this takes up a precious rare relic slot, you could have probably equipped it with something else anyway. But like I said, it's not the worst relic, it's not the greatest either, so I give it an A. Alright, moving on, we have the Caulfield's Warhammer. So this is just a flat +2/+1 on your champion, and quite frankly this is a no-brainer. I'm immediately gonna put this in the D. Why is this in the D if I really had to? Is quite simply because there are so many better options out there in terms of the relics. You can make do without the +2/+1, because when you're doing a run in the Path of Champions, you're probably gonna get item chests and whatnot, and chances are you're already gonna get a attack stat buff or a health stat buff. Stuff like the Phage or the Colossal Hammer, which will do a better job. And if you're insanely lucky, you'll probably get something like a Black Cleaver or a, a Titan's Axe, and that will actually be a bigger attack stat buff if you're looking to get the attack stat buff from the Colossal Hammer. So this is a no-brainer, this is immediately a D. Alright, next up we have the Corrupted Star Fragment. So its effect is support kill my supported ally and grant me its keywords and stats. This is arguably one of my favorite relics to use in the game. Quite simply because this works really well with several champions, namely in my most recent video, in the Bard video, you can see I took advantage of the Corrupted Star Fragment to its maximum effect, and at the same time it also works with the Ornn. So basically what's gonna happen is that you kill your supported ally, and then that supported ally transfers its stats and keywords to the champion that you've equipped it with. So in my opinion, this should be at least in the B category. That's quite simply because first of all, you are going to be killing a unit, which means you are going to be sacrificing or depriving yourself of a unit on the board to block or attack in the coming turn. The only redeeming factor about this is that you're going to be able to transfer the stats to the champion. So it's a really good item in my opinion, because if you can transfer stuff like the elusive or a huge stat buff, you're probably going to be able to deal a lot of damage. But if there's really nothing to transfer, or basically if you don't have a unit to kill the transfer, this relic is really just a pointless relic to have, and it just occupies your relic slot. Alright, moving on, we have the Crownguard Inheritance, when I level up Rally. So this is arguably one of my favorite items to have, quite simply because of its effect. It's a really simple effect and it works well with most champions, I would say. I took advantage of this heavily in the Misfortune run I did on the channel. I think this actually worked with the Alawi run as well, if I'm not mistaken. So the Crownguard Inheritance is arguably one of the best items to have. It's also a reward from the Darius's 2-star campaign, so it should be really easily obtainable. And if you're playing this game for the first time, I highly recommend trying to get this item from the get-go. The Rally is a really amazing thing. So I think this item deserves to be at least in the lower A or the higher B, quite simply because the effect is great, the Rally is decent, but it's not going to be that useful, moving forward, because it's only a one-time effect per game. So once you've triggered the Rally upon leveling up the champion that it's equipped on, you're probably not going to be able to trigger it one more time, unless this is used on an Evelyn instead, which will actually be really beneficial. But since Evelyn is the only champion that will take advantage of this multiple times so efficiently, I think this deserves to be in the A and not in the S. Alright, so next up we have the Dreadway Chase Gun. So full disclaimer, some of my relics here are grayed out because I do not have them unlocked yet. If you have played the Path of Champions, you'll know not all relics are available from the get-go. You have to unlock them by luck, and if you are lucky, you will get the relics you want. If not, you're probably not gonna get the relics you want. You'll get fragments instead. So yeah, the Dreadway Chase Gun is probably one of the relics that I have still locked, grayed out, and as you can see here, its effect is when I'm summoned, create 2 warning shots in hand. I think, in my opinion, this one is probably gonna go straight into a C. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's that good either, quite simply because the warning shot isn't too great. Well, this could actually be kinda decent if you are pairing it with a Jinn or a Misfortune, mainly because you're gonna be pairing that up with another relic later on, which is the Luden's Tempest, so the warning shot will get an increased damage stat, but outside of that, I don't really see much use of these. The warning shot is really just, cheese damage, if you will. Basically, you want to trigger plunder with it, but outside of that, the warning shot, I don't think it's that, important. And at the same time, it's only an effect on summon, so it's just going to be creating 2 warning shots, and once you play those 2 warning shots, it's not going to be that useful anymore. Alright, moving on, we have one of my favorite items here in the Path of Champions, the Galeforce Scout, Round and Recall Me. This is arguably one of the more overpowered or broken relics here on the game, quite simply because of its effect. Scout is amazing, that means you get to attack twice a turn. Round and Recall Me, that means the champion might be able to survive the round before anything plays, and you can bring it on the next turn and just trigger the Scout again consistently. So yeah, the Galeforce is a no-brainer. It's just an immediately straight S. I think it's even higher up than the Arcane Comet here. In fact, if you've caught my Jax video or the Diana video here on the channel, this Galeforce actually helped me out a lot, and I think it should benefit a lot of the champions as well. I just haven't really had the time to experiment with it yet, but quite frankly, this is arguably one of the better items to have. Now, I know some of you are actually wondering how to get this Galeforce here, so I will just quickly talk about it real quick. The Galeforce was actually obtained in last month's event, which was, I believe, the Awakening event, where we had Kayn, Jax, and I believe a Ornn or something. So basically there was an ongoing event at the time that actually gave us the Galeforce for free through a line of quests. I am unfortunately unsure, however, whether the Galeforce is still obtainable. I believe it should be, because it's a rare relic, and I doubt, Riot will basically wall off a rare relic. I would like to believe that it should be obtainable in the reliquaries, the silver reliquaries, since the silver reliquaries give the rare relics, if you will. Unfortunately, I have not seen it personally, so feel free to let me know if any of you have actually actually gotten, you know, duplicate Galeforces or, Galeforces from the Silver Reliquaries, feel free to let me know and drop it down in the comment section down below. It will really help out a lot of people and I really appreciate that. Okay, so let's move on into the next item, which is the Golden Spatula. So this is another item that I have not unlocked yet, but its effect is when I'm summoned, grant me +1/+1 and a random keyword for every 30 cards that started in your deck. Alright, so I think this should be a decent enough item for Kai'Sa, because quite simply Kai'Sa's entire gimmick is to have keywords. But what I don't really like about this is the fact that it's for every 30 cards that started in your deck. Now, if you've seen my videos, I've always said not to overcrowd your deck with unnecessary cards. So quite frankly, I don't think this will be too much of use for me. I have not actually tried this yet because, like I said, this item is still locked. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put this at a C. I'll give myself the benefit of the doubt. And quite frankly, because it does give keywords, so it's not too bad. So I think it warrants to be in the C spot. Alright, moving on, we have the Greenglade Shadeleaf. Support, grant my supported ally elusive. So this item is unlocked from Annie's 2-star campaign, which is in Ionia. It's a really useful item to have in my opinion, because quite frankly we get to grant the supported ally elusive. Now if you pair this up with the Corrupted Star Fragment and basically you put the Greenglade Shadeleaf first before the Corrupted Star Fragment, what's gonna happen is that you're gonna be granting elusive to your supported ally, and when the Corrupted Star Fragment kicks in, you kill that supported ally, you're gonna be transferring the elusive to yourself. And this is arguably one of the better items in this game. I have actually used it to really good effect in the Ornn against the Aurelian Sol, and I believe I did this with the Bard as well, which is also a really good item to have. I think the ranking for this one is probably going to be in the lower A, quite simply because the Grant Elusive is great, but if you don't really have the right tools to capitalize on it, like the Corrupted Star Fragment to basically just grant to transfer the elusive to your champion, or basically if you don't have a strong enough ally to give the elusive to, this Greenglade Shadeleaf isn't probably going to be one of your best items. Alright, next up we have the Guardian Angel. Again, another item that I have not unlocked yet, but its effect here is to start adventures with +1 revive. I think this item is probably one of the weaker items in this game. The +1 revive isn't going to be that important unless you're really struggling with the adventures. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to immediately put this at the C, and if I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I don't really think the revive makes that much of a difference. Well, if you have a champion that is really weak into that particular adventure, regardless of how many times you're going to revive that champion or, you know, revive yourself to replay or reattempt that particular game, chances are you're not gonna win. So your relic slot might be better off being given something else instead. Alright, next up we have the Guardian's Orb. When I'm summoned, grant epic items to 3 random cards in your deck. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I have not personally used this item because quite frankly, I don't really see the benefit to it. The epic items are great, but chances are you're probably gonna be able to pick them up from most of the item chests along the way in your adventure. And if you get really lucky and you somehow get an unstable inventory, which is the legendary power, chances are you don't really need this relic. So I think for that fact alone, the Guardian's Orb is probably gonna sit in the D if I really had to. Alright, moving on, we have the Guardian's Trinket. Adventures start, add 2 copies of a random champion to your deck, attach a random epic item to it. So this item is a really hit and miss one for me. I have had some fairly, well, decent amount of success with it, and at the same time, I didn't really have too much success. Most notably, this item seems to be really good on board based on what you guys have told me, and I'm kinda inclined to agree. Quite simply because, as we all know, the Bard is a fairly slow champion, a sluggish champion, so it might be worth having, you know, additional options in your deck. But at the same time, I am someone who likes to work with my deck and not try to, basically pollute my deck, if you will, with too many unnecessary cards. So I think this Guardian's Trinket is gonna sit in the B category for me. It's nice, and I actually like it because it has the option of giving us a really overpowered champion. Say if you don't get a Z from the free champion node at the start of your adventure, you could potentially try to aim for getting a Z, with the Guardian's Trinket. But like I said, it's far too unreliable, and at the same time, it's really niche. There are probably better options out there, but I think it's not the worst. Alright, up next we have the Heart of Gold. You earn 50% additional gold during adventures. So this is again one of the hit and miss items, quite simply because on its own it's not too great. Even though if you have 2 of this, it's not too decent either, even though you get 100% additional gold. Quite simply because gold isn't that big of a problem in the Path of Champions. Gold is kind of easy to come by. All you need to do is basically just, advance through the adventure and essentially you will have enough gold. So alone, it's probably not one of the best items. However, if you pair this up with the Bounty Hunter's Renown, which is another item which we will get to later on, it could be a really good item. So I think for that fact alone, I am actually gonna put this here in the B category, nice, and I think it will be above the Corrupted Star Fragment as well. Quite simply because with the right pairing it could be great, but on its own it's not that good. Okay, so next up we have the Hymn of Valour. When I'm summoned, create a redoubled Valour in hand. So this item is actually obtained from completing Bard's 2-star campaign, and this is arguably one of my recent favorite items to use. Quite simply because this is amazing with Varus. Varus essentially needs you to target himself to level up, and with the redoubled Valour you are able to target and at the same time potentially, you know, get double redoubled Valors, if you will, upon one cast. Essentially you're going to be able to buff up the Varus and deal excellent damage. In fact, I think I covered this really well in one of my videos here, which guarantees almost 100 damage every time you play the Varus with the redoubled Valor. So I think this particular item deserves to be in the nice category. Quite simply because the redoubled Valor itself is kind of expensive, and also it's a really niche item. It's not to say a bad item, because redoubled Valor is always nice, but to take full advantage of it, I would say you need to cast it on a champion that can actually synergize kind of well with it. Alright, next up we have the Jaurim's Fist, and its effect is a flat +1/+2. So again, this is a similar situation like the Caulfield's Warhammer. There are probably better options out there that you're gonna get while you're playing the Path of Champions in your runs. Stuff like the Savage Shield, which gives a +1/+3. It's a rare item. You could of course get a slightly weaker studded letter with the +1/+1. But again, like I said, you're probably going to be able to get stat buffs kinda easily, so immediately this is just going to go into the D category if I really had to. Alright, next up we have the Laurent Bladerack, Allies Have Challenger. So this is arguably one of the better items in this game, quite simply because Challenger allows us to fashion out, you know, opportunities to attack and whatnot. However, in terms of any champion benefiting greatly from this, I would say all of them benefit, because quite frankly the Challenger isn't, you know, paramount to a win condition or something. So I would say this immediately goes into the awesome category, and I think it might even go slightly above the Crownguard Inheritance as well, quite simply because, like I said, you're going to be able to drag out opponents and give your strongest units the ability to attack. Okay, moving on, we have the Luden's Tempest. All of your spells and skills deal 1 extra damage. So this particular item is obtained from the Lux 2-star campaign against the Ezreal, and this is definitely one of the better items in the game. The Luden's Tempest works really well with a myriad of champions. Lux herself works really well with this because the final spark will actually get 1 extra damage. You can play this on a Misfortune as well, because the Love Tap and Bullet Time will actually deal even more damage that way. Annie also benefits greatly from this, and I believe Jhin is also a really good pick for this particular item. It's also just occurred to me that, you know, the Gwen actually benefits really well from the Luden's Tempest. In fact, I just tested this out last week and it was definitely a great pick, and I think certain other champions that I have not personally played yet, like the Veigar, could also benefit from this. So I think this item deserves to be at least in the S tier, quite simply because of its flexibility, its efficiency, and overall, you know, decent damage output. Alright, next up we have the Luminous Orb, +0/+3, and I can block units with Elusive. So this is one of those items that I have not actually used, quite simply because, you know, I haven't really found the opportunity to use it, and I don't really think it's that useful to me. However, going off the effect, it seems kinda great. +0/+3, and I can block units with Elusive. Basically, you're gonna get extra health, and at the same time, you can block those pesky Elusive units, which are really predominant in like the Ezreal deck, as well as stuff like the Ionia deck as well. So basically, it could be a fairly decent item. In terms of champion pairings, I think they should work really well with any champion in my opinion, because like I said, it can block an Elusive, so it's not too big of a deal. However, I think there are probably better items out there, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in the C not bad category. Alright, moving on, we have the Riptide Battery. Plunder, play Cannon Barrage a number of times equal to my cost. So this is arguably a really good item as well, quite simply because this is one of the items that work really well with Jhin. So Jhin is a 4-cost champion, right? That means upon Plunder, you're going to play Cannon Barrage 4 times, and that basically is going to accelerate Jhin's level up like crazy. And if you combine this with a Luden's Tempest, that is a hell of a lot of damage, not only to the Nexus, but any you know, enemies on the board, because that is what the Cannon Barrage does after all. So I would say this item deserves to be in the A awesome category. I think it's going to be here in the higher A and the lower S, quite simply because it's only specific to Jhin. I think Misfortune could kind of work with this as well, but I haven't actually tried it out yet. So far, I know the only champion that works with this is Jhin, so I'm going to put this there. I also forgot to mention mention that this is also a reward from the Yasuo 2-star campaign, so that means it should be pretty easy to get. Alright, next up we have the Stalker's Blade. When I'm summoned, I strike the strongest enemy. So this item is also a reward from a champion campaign. It is a reward from the Jinx 2-star campaign, which is a fairly easy campaign to complete as well as a fairly easy champion to use. So the Stalker's Blade is a really basic item, I would say. When I'm summoned, I strike the strongest enemy. You just can't go wrong with that. And this is arguably one of the better items in the game as well. First of all, because a strike is really universal, it really helps out a lot regardless of the champion. But there are certain champions that will take full advantage of this item. So the first champion that comes to mind is probably going to be a Kayn. That's quite simply because if you take a look at Kayn's star power, he needs to kill a unit to get a stat buff. And essentially when you recall the Kayn once he levels up, you're going to be able to play the Stalker's Blade again and it's going to kill a unit potentially. So it's probably one of the better items to have on him. Another champion that could heavily benefit from this is probably a champion like Garen, quite simply because he needs to strike twice to level up. So I think this is arguably a really good item to have. Quite simply, you can never go wrong with this. A strike is a strike, and if you have enough attack stat, you're probably going to be able to kill your enemy regardless. So I think this item deserves to be in the A tier, and I think at least in the high A tier. Alright, next up we have the Star Gem. So this is another relic that I have locked. I have not actually tried it out yet, but according to its effect here, allied champions have +1/+1. This is kind of nice because it's a flat +1/+1 to allied champions. However, there are probably better options out there because I know for a fact that there is a power, a rare power, which I cannot remember the name, that will actually give allies a +1/+0. So basically it's the Star Gem but better because it gives every single unit a +1/+0, whereas the Star Gem only gives a champions the +1. You can potentially compensate for that health buff with giving your units items and whatnot, but in general I think the Star Gem is not that great of an item, so I think I'm gonna put this down in the D category. Alright, so moving on, we have the Succubus Brand, which is a +1/+1, and when I kill a unit, summon a random husk. So this is clearly an Evelyn item because essentially Evelyn's whole mechanic is centered around husk. However, I think there are probably better options out there. First, when you're running an Evelyn, you're probably going to want to run a Crownguard Inheritance to take advantage of the rally, because after all, Evelyn is going to level up 5 times per game at least. So all in all, I think I'm going to put this in the B category, quite simply because we get to summon a random husk, and it actually works kind of well with Evelyn, I do not deny that, but I don't think we're going to need that many husks because Evelyn's deck is already centered around generating husks. Alright, next up we have the Tempest Blade. When I level up, stun all enemies. So this is also one of my favorite items to have in the game, quite simply because of its effect. It's an immediate stun upon level up. However, the drawback from this is that it only occurs once. But then again, I come back to the Evelyn theory here, because Evelyn is going to level up 5 times. The Tempest Blade can essentially be a really, really good power to have if you need to basically stun the board. You're going to be able to stun the entire board, and with the Crownguard Inheritance, which is another must-have relic on Evelyn, you're going to be able to attack consistently and get a clean nexus to attack. Basically, a empty nexus because every single unit on the enemy side is stunned. So I think this item is probably one of the better items in this game, and I think I'm gonna rank it up on the A here. I might even just give it a high A. I'm not gonna be too concerned about the order at this point. Once again, I forgot to mention that this particular item is obtained from the Misfortune 2-star campaign, and I believe I also used this efficiently in the Misfortune adventure against Aurelion Sol here on the channel, so that's why I'm a heavy advocate for it. Alright, moving on, we have the Berserker's Buckle. When I survive damage, grant me +2/+2. So this item is a really good item for the Tahm Kench, because after all, the Tahm Kench will get a stat buff once you strike an enemy, if I'm not mistaken. So potentially couple this with the Tahm Kench, you're probably going to be able to get a lot of stat buffs here. It's also not just only the Tahm Kench that will benefit from this. Champions with high health stats like the Alawi or the Garen can also benefit from the Berserker's Buckle. So I think overall it's a nice item to have, and I think it's going to be in the B category. Alright, next up we have the Bounty Hunter's Renown. I have +1/+1 for every 200 gold you have. So this item is what I said works really well with the Heart of Gold here. Because with the Heart of Gold, you're probably going to be able to increase the amount of gold you get consistently. And once you combine that with the Bounty Hunter's Renown, you're probably going to get a lot of good damage. However, on its own, I don't think it's a really good item, because quite frankly, you're going to be spending a lot of gold on the shops that you're going to encounter whenever you're doing a run here in the Path of Champions. So I think it deserves to be in the nice category, quite simply because the stat buff is a welcome addition if you have the extra gold, as well as a good pairing with the Heart of Gold, but on its own, I don't think it's going to be too beneficial. Alright, next up we have the Cardmaster's Gambit. +1/+1, and when you win an encounter without taking any Nexus damage, earn 1 reroll. So this is arguably gonna be a no-brainer for me. I feel like this item deserves to be in the D category because quite frankly, the odds of you winning a battle without taking any damage is really slim. The chances are you're probably gonna take at least 1 damage. So I would say this is not the best item to have because the percentage of usefulness for this, in my opinion, is really low. Don't get me wrong, the 1 reroll is great, but if you really need a reroll, you're better off purchasing that reroll from the slot bot instead of relying on the Cardmaster's Gambit to give you that reroll. Alright, so next up we have the Collector. +1/+1, and when I kill an enemy, you earn 50 gold, max 2 kills per encounter. So this item I believe should work somewhat well with the Bounty Hunter's Renown, but I don't really have any experience playing this item, and just going off the description here, it isn't that great. You only get +1/+1 to a maximum of 2 times because of the 2 kills per encounter cap there, and at the same time you only earn 50 gold per kill. So basically that means you're gonna get extra 100 gold whenever you kill 2 enemies per game, and I think it's not the best item out there in terms of efficiency. So I think immediately it's just gonna go into the D tier for me. In my opinion, it's probably just a waste of a relic slot. If you really need that extra gold, you're better off going with a Heart of Gold there, which will basically guarantee that you get a 100% additional bonus at the end of each game. Alright, so next up we have the fan favorite, the cult classic, the Curator's Gatebreaker. When I'm summoned, I strike the enemy nexus. This item is probably one of the most busted items in the game. If you pair this up with a really good champion, someone like the Darius, someone like the Garen, someone like the Kayn, something like a Teemo, you are gonna be doing a lot of consistent nexus damage, and there are certain ways to essentially break the game with this. And if you caught my most recent Darius video where I actually took advantage of 3 Curator's Gatebreakers here, this is arguably a cheat code in the game specifically for the Aurelian Soul. So in my opinion, this item deserves to be a high S. I know it only benefits certain champions, it synergizes really well with only select champions, but even if the champion doesn't have a strike level up condition or a strike win condition, if you will, you could be able to take advantage of this if the champion has a high enough attack stat, and chances are you're already going to have a high enough attack stat because they're going to couple that with the stat buffs that you're going to get along the way in your adventure. Alright, so next up we have the Deceiver's Crest. When I level up, create a copy of my champion spell in hand, it costs 0 this round. I think this is a really good item because the champion spells are usually very good items. So if I take the Darius for example, right, upon leveling up the Darius, we're going to be able to get a 0 cost Decimate, which will essentially deal 4 to the enemy nexus, which I think is a really good item to have. And I'm just quoting the Darius here for example. I'm very sure there's probably a lot more champions there that could take heavy advantage of the Deceiver's Crest here. I think people like the Misfortune could actually work. Make It Rain combined with the Luden's Tempest is going to deal a lot of damage. So yeah, I think you can see my point here. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank this up in the awesome category because quite frankly there are probably better options out there, but because it's really flexible and really useful on practically almost every champion, I think it's arguably one of the better items to have in this game. Alright, moving on, we have the Grand General's Counterplan. Round start, create a fleeting copy of me in hand. So this item, or this relic rather, is actually obtained from Vi's 2-star campaign, and I think this is a really situational item. Quite simply because you're going to be able to create a fleeting copy in hand, and say for example if you're unlucky enough for the enemy to obliterate or kill your champion, you could be able to just bring on the fleeting copy and it's just going to keep chaining up from there. You're going to be able to create several fleeting copies every round, and I believe it will also transform to a champion spell which you could potentially cast if you need to. So I think it's one of the good items to have in this game. It works really well with any champion, and I think this warrants it to be in the B category. Alright, next up we have the Gravedigger's Spade. Round start, draw 1 and give it fleeting. So this relic is obtained from completing Alawi's 2-star campaign, and in my opinion it's probably not the best relic to have. Round start, draw 1 and give it fleeting isn't that great, especially since that particular card is going to be discarded moving forward in that game, unless you have that particular power which will actually reshuffle your discarded cards back into your deck. If you don't have that, the Gravedigger's Spade is basically kind of detrimental to your deck. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put this immediately in the D category. It could be good. The draw 1 could be great because it gives you options to play. But if say for example you draw an expensive card and you do not have enough mana that round, that could be kind of bad because you're essentially starving yourself of that particular card later on if the game drags on into the late game. Alright, next up we have the Loose Cannon's Payload. When I'm summoned, discard your hand, then create that many Pow-Pows in hand. So this is arguably one of the better items in this game, and it's also obtainable from Garen's 2-star campaign. campaign, it works really well with Jinx because quite frankly the Jinx star power will essentially benefit from you discarding your hand, deal 1 to the Nexus whenever you discard a card, and with the loose cannon's payload, the amount you discard in your hand, you're gonna deal that same amount of damage into the enemy Nexus. However, the downside of this is that it only works well with the Jinx. If you use it on a different champion, it's probably not gonna be that useful because you're gonna be discarding your hand and you're gonna be filling it with Pow Pows. Even though you get 3 damage per Pow Pow cast, you can't really do anything sustainable, and I think for that fact alone, it deserves to be in the nice category, the high nice category at least. Mainly because, like I said, it is exceptional in the Jinx. It is really good with the Jinx, but in terms of other champions, it's not that great in my opinion. Alright, next up we have the Scourge's Stash. Plunder I cost 2 less. So this item, or relic rather, is obtained from Lee Sin's 2-star campaign, and this particular relic is fairly decent, although not the greatest. Plunder I cost 2 less could be useful on really expensive champions like the Ornn or the Darius, but there are probably better options out there, like getting a straight up cost reduction within the adventure itself. The Plunder is decent if you are really desperate to bring the particular champion onto the board early. In fact, I have used this item in the past when I did not have access to the Corrupted Star Fragment, so it is not too bad, but it is not the greatest either. I think because of that fact alone, I am just gonna put this in the C. It should only benefit more expensive champions. You don't really need the Plunder on your cheaper champions, and like I said, you're probably gonna be able to get consistent cost reduction from the item chest and the item notes that you're gonna get in your adventures. Alright, so next up we have the Troll King's Crown. Allies have Overwhelm. So this is arguably one of my favorite items to have here in the game because it gives all allies Overwhelm upon summoning the champion. However, it has one flaw, one major flaw, because there's already a common power which will actually give this same effect, which is the Crush power. Allies have Overwhelm, and it's from the get-go. You don't have to bring on the champion with the Troll King's Crown in order to get the effect with the power. So I think for that fact alone, I am probably going to put this in the not bad category. I have used this efficiently in the Diana adventure I've done here on the channel, and I believe with the Misfortune as well, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, it's really situational. If you don't get a Crush, it could be beneficial, but if you do have a Crush, you're essentially wasting your relic slot here. So I think we're gonna put this in the not bad category. Alright, next up we have the turret plating. Your Nexus has Tough. So this is arguably one of the fairly decent items to have in this game. It's not too bad, it's not too great either. Essentially, if you have a Lysandra support champion, or if you are really lucky and you get a level up legendary power, and if you somehow get a Lysandra from that particular power, you're probably not gonna need the turret plating here. In fact, if I'm gonna be honest with you, the turret plating doesn't really make that much of a difference unless you're playing really defensively like the Ornn or something. In my opinion, it's better to play aggressively and just get damage from the get-go, so I don't think it's a great item. In my opinion, I think this deserves to go into the lower C's, quite simply because, like I said, it's not that useful, it's only a really defensive item, and I think you should be able to live without it. Alright, so next up we have the Voidborne Carapace. When any unit dies, grant me its keyword. So automatically this should tell you this works really well with the Kai'Sa. I have not actually tried it out yet because quite simply I do not have it unlocked. But going off that fact alone, I think this should be in the nice category because this could actually progress Kai'Sa's level up, but I think the chances of it being really effective consistently is going to be really slim because quite frankly Kai'Sa already generates the spell that will grant her the keywords of the specific ally, so I don't think this particular relic is that good. Alright, and for the final rare relic today, we have the Wriggled's Lantern. Round end, grant me impact twice if I'm in hand, and it caps to a max of 10. So this item I think is really good on expensive champions. Stuff like the Vi, which I forgot to mention as well, benefits really well from the Curator's Gatebreaker. But yeah, stuff like the Vi, stuff like the Ornn, stuff like the Darius, stuff like the Garen as well. If you don't have certain relics that I mentioned earlier, you could potentially capitalize on this by giving the Wriggled's Lantern to it. I believe the Bard should work kind of well as well because he takes a while to get onto the board, so you could essentially stack some important damage. And specifically on the Ornn as well as the Bard build, if you couple this with the Greenglade Shadeleaf and the Corrupted Star Fragment, you should be able to get consistent Nexus damage with the Wriggled's Lantern. So in my opinion, this item deserves to be in the B category. I'm not going to be too specific on where I rank this here because quite frankly, there are better items to have, but I think it should be fairly beneficial on more expensive champions. Alright, up next we have the common relics here. So again, like I said, I will try my best not to be too biased against these relics, but quite frankly, many of these aren't that great because there are probably item nodes in the adventure that will actually compensate for the lack of these relics. However, from a beginner's perspective, this could be good, so I will try not to be too harsh on my grading with the common relics here. Alright, so let's start things off with the Armordillo Shell. +0, +1, and Tough. In my opinion, this is a slight upgrade from the standard Tough that you're gonna get from the item nodes in the adventure, so I think think this deserves to be in the not bad category. Quite frankly, because a +1 to the health isn't really gonna make that much of a difference, but just on the fact that you get a +1 and a tough together, I think it deserves to be slightly higher than most of the other common relics in this particular list. Alright, next up we have the Banshee's Veil, which will give a flat spell shield. Now this is arguably a really good item to have, especially when you're taking on the Aurelian Soul, because as we all know, the Aurelian Soul has a lot of obliterates, and in fact I think it's a really good item to have in general, mainly because that will protect you from potential vengeances or even, you know, kill spells or whatnot. However, you should be able to get this fairly easily once you've beaten a mini boss or potentially from champion item chests or whatnot, but because it's not a guaranteed thing, I am inclined to put the spell shield here in the nice category, quite simply because it guarantees a spell shield through a relic, but it is a waste of a relic slot, so I don't think it's that great. Moving on, we have the Everfrost. When I'm summoned, stun the strongest enemy. This item is a fairly decent item, especially on champions like Yasuo. After all, Yasuo benefits greatly from seeing champions get stunned, so this could actually progress his level up, or if you're bringing on a leveled up Yasuo, you could potentially strike the enemy upon summon, and that way you could take it out and basically just clear up the board a little bit and give you a little bit more breathing room, if you will. So I think this item deserves to be in the not bad category. I think there's probably better options out there. If you're lucky enough to get a Hold It, which is a rare power, which will essentially round start stun the strongest enemy, you could do away with the Everfrost in my opinion. Alright, next up we have the Ginsu's Rage Blade. Attack grant me +1/+1. So this is arguably a beginner item, because if I'm not mistaken, when you first play the Path of Champions, you're gonna be given a Ginsu's Rage Blade from the get-go. Attack grant me +1/+1 is always really nice to have, and I think they should benefit really well with champions that like to attack consistently. So stuff like the Vayne could actually work really well with this, because, you know, you're probably going to be attacking several times with the Vayne, and I think it just works with any champion in general. Who doesn't like a flat +1/+1? And I think it also contributes to the Bard's level up progression, because he needs to see stats being raised, so I think it's a fairly decent item to have. I think all things considered, I am going to put this in the nice category. A single +1/+1 is not the greatest, but if you can attack consistently, this could essentially snowball out of hand and basically get really beneficial for you. Alright, next up we have the Lost Chapter. When I'm summoned, refill your spell mana. So this is basically like a weaker version of the Archangel Staff, and in my opinion it is probably a far worse version of the Archangel Staff. If you really have to use this relic, go on ahead, but in my opinion I think this is going to be on the C side, quite simply because it has its uses for one turn, which is to refill your spell mana, which will allow you to play certain spells. But once you've done that, it's basically pointless. There's really no incentive to having this particular relic, so I think that warrants it being in the C spot. Alright, next up we have the Ravenous Hydra. When I'm summoned, deal 1 to all enemies. In my opinion, this isn't the greatest item to have, quite simply because deal 1 isn't really going to be doing too much, and I don't see it being too useful anyways, so I think I'm just immediately going to put this into the D category here. Alright, next up we have the Soul Spear, +1/+0 and Fearsome. So this is another common relic which I am not that big of a fan of, quite simply because it is really beneficial on really cheap champions. So if you equip this on an Annie, it could be great, especially if you draw an Annie, you could immediately just get the attack, as well as no blockers because of Fearsome at the start. Chances are a lot of the units are going to be less than 3 power, and as we all know, Fearsome only allows units more than 3 power to block. So it could be really good from the get-go, but it easily falls off as the game progresses later on, so I think it's not that great of a relic to have, and in my opinion, I think I'm going to put this into the D category as well. Alright, next up we have the Storm Razor, which will basically grant us a bonus quick attack. So if I'm not mistaken, you can actually get the quick attack from some of the item chests as well as the item notes in whatever adventure you're playing. So basically this is a fairly redundant keyword, and it's only necessary if you really need the quick attack. I think you should be able to live without it, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to immediately put this in the D category as well. I'm giving a lot of these common relics D because, like I said, many of them aren't too useful. Some of them are fairly okay, but a majority of them aren't that great. Alright, next up is the Chameleon's Necklace. Game start, create 2 copies of me in your deck. So this relic is actually really good with Bard, according to some of you. I have actually tried this for my Bard run. Now I have not actually had any success using this with Bard together. Whenever I use this on Bard, I don't really get that far. Is it a bad item? I don't think so. It's probably because I'm not that big of a fan of Bard and I'm not really good at playing him. So chances are I'm just not able to benefit, you know, greatly from this particular item. However, to be fair, I am gonna put this in the nice category because I do not deny the way Bard works, the Chameleon's necklace could be a really good pairing with him. Unfortunately, I just do not have the best experience, so I think we're just gonna put in a nice category and probably not higher up. Alright, so moving on, we have the Grand Duelist Blade, which will just give us a challenger. Again, this is not the best item to have because quite frankly, there's probably gonna be a lot of item chests along the way in your adventures, and they're probably gonna be able to give you a challenger if you really need one. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna immediately put this in the D category. It's not my favorite, and frankly, I don't think it's gonna be that useful. Moving on, we have the Starchild Staff. Game start, Helion Nexus 5. So this is a fairly situational item, if you will. Quite frankly, because the heal isn't that important. If you are already past a certain champion level, you should be able to get a consistent 4 heal at the end of each game. So chances are the heal Nexus 5 is not that good. However, if you are a beginner, this could be kinda useful for you. But in my opinion, healing your Nexus isn't that important. What you really want to do is you really want to close out games quickly. So I would suggest try to focus on aggression. And with all that being said, I think the heal could be decent. So I think I'm just gonna put this in the not bad category. I have not personally used this item, but I can definitely see its uses. Next up is the Troll King's Crusher. So again, like the Challenger as well as the Storm Razor, this is probably not a great item to have. Mainly because you can get the Overwhelm keyword from some of the item chests as well as the item nodes in your adventure. So this is going to be an immediate D here in my opinion. Alright, next up we have the True Ice Flail. When I'm summoned, give enemies vulnerable this round. So this is going to be useful for one round, and at the same time it will give enemies vulnerable. So basically you're going to be able to fashion out chances on an attacking turn. So I think this deserves to go into the not bad category because quite frankly the vulnerable isn't too bad. Alright, next up we have the Warmock's armor with the regeneration. Again, same reasons like the Storm Razor, the Challenger here as well as the Overwhelm. This is not that great because you can potentially pick up the regeneration keyword from item chests along the way in your adventure. So I'm not going to elaborate too much on this. I'm just going to immediately put this in the D category. And last but not least, we have the Z-Drive prototype. Start adventures with +2 rerolls. So this is a fairly decent item to have, especially if you're not at a high enough legend account level. Quite simply because at a high legend account level, you will have access to more rerolls. So if you're starting out really low, chances are you might benefit greatly from this. But as you can see here, I have not unlocked this specific relic, so I have not been able to use this particular relic. And in my opinion, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But because I know it could be a fairly decent relic for beginners, what I am going to do is I am going to put this up in the not bad category. Quite simply because I know the rerolls are nice, which means you could potentially get better powers. Alright guys, and there you have it. That is my tier list for the relics here in the Path of Champions. Let me just quickly zoom back out a little bit just to give you guys a better view. So let me know what are your thoughts and your opinions about my tier list here, because again, like I said, tier lists are really subjective. So some of you might have a certain relic ranked high up and a certain relic ranked lower down. So this is just purely based on my opinion and my experience with the game. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, consider leaving a like as well as subscribing to the channel. I really do appreciate your support, but most importantly, it's so that you don't miss future episodes or uploads of Legends of Runeterra or Path of Champions content just like this one. And with that being said, this is Gateflow signing off. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for joining me as well. Hopefully I catch you guys in the next one. Goodbye.